Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to the session, Community-Centered Fellowship, Learnings from Experience, and welcome to the Indiana Arts Homecoming. My name is Ploy Pagdalian, and I am a member of the Homecoming Steering Committee. I am pleased to welcome you today. Today's session will be led by my colleagues, Scott Janz, Director of Artist Programs at Arts for Learning, ABC Fellow Portia Jackson, who is a storyteller and teaching artist, and finally, ABC Fellow Mark Pei, a musician, teacher, and teaching artist. Before I turn this over to our presenters, I'm just going to go over a few things. Please remain muted during the presentation until the Q&A, and so we can give our full attention to our presenters. Feel free to utilize the chat function to introduce yourself and ask questions throughout the session. And if you would like to rename yourself in Zoom, you can do that by hovering over your image, clicking the three dots, and selecting Rename. Captioning is also available during the session and throughout the conference. You can turn those on by clicking the Closed Caption button in the bottom navigation bar. If you have any questions or tech issues throughout the session, please feel free to send Chapin a direct message in the chat. And with that, I am turning it over to my esteemed colleagues to get started.
Thank you, Ploy. And hi, everybody, all across the state here for coming and spending some time with us today. It's my absolute pleasure to come to you from Indianapolis here at our wonderful space down in the Kennedy King neighborhood at Arts for Learning. I'm Scott Janz, Director of Artist Programs. Would the other two presenters like to introduce yourselves real fast?
Hi, my name is Portia Jackson, also known as Mama Portia. I am an Artist Building Community Fellow, and I'm a storyteller, and I'm excited to share with you today.
My name is Mark Pei, and I am a fellow as well. Enjoy being a teaching artist and good friend of Miss Mama Portia, and we're so excited to be here. I am a musician as well as a music educator and youth advocate.
And on top of all of those wonderful roles, Portia and Mark have said, they have also been a part of our inaugural Artist Building Community Fellowship, a new approach that Arts for Learning has taken to grassroots community development as far as building long-form relationships and dispersing our programming. We'd love to give you some insight into that today, so thank you for coming. I'm going to share my screen here. If for some reason the video or audio doesn't work, please somebody let me know before we spend the whole time. I know we've all been in those meetings, looking at a whole 10-minute video, no one can hear it, nobody says anything, so please, I'm more happy to stop and restart if we need to. So a little bit of background about Arts for Learning. Here, presented by one of our fellows who could not be on this call at this time, Giselle Trujillo. We're going to learn a bit about the community work they've been doing through this wonderful video they've made about it. I'm going to start a little later.
And water bottles, plastic containers,
papers, pictures.
Two scholars, they were arguing, they didn't want to work in the activity, everybody were doing it. And I give them 2 markers for the whiteboard. And I say, you start in this side, you start in this side. And when you get to the middle of your drawing, you're going to be friends. And it happened. That was amazing. And then I saw them, talking each other, and they found other ways to communicate it.
It's definitely helped with the social and emotional learning for kids. I think giving them more options to approach problems, more, like a different perspective they can definitely learn how to control their emotions, how to kind of direct that towards what they're making, and how to really express what they're thinking and what they're feeling emotionally.
They truly enjoy that class and they do very well. It also helps them social and emotionally as well to be able to express themselves in other ways, learning how to control their emotions when they're feeling sad or even happy. So that class helps them a lot as well.
The gentleman who just refused to hardly even look up. He was having a terrible day. And so fortunately, I was able to, through the music, get him involved and engaged to the point that he was trying the violin. His whole vibration changed. He grew a smile on his face. It was just a beautiful metamorphosis.
I made good friends. I made a lot of friends. I learned that I enjoy art. I may not do art every day or as a hobby. I just learned that I could use art to express myself. I don't really like art, I just do it to express myself.
I even got to play one I'd never tried before. It was really cool.
I discovered that art is very good and make you relax. You can draw and you can show yourself with art.
I became
So yeah, a little see and hear from young folks themselves that we've been working with and some community partners. Again, that was some work that Giselle Trujillo has been working on this summer, one of our Artist Building Community Fellows. A little background, and they're entering the room now. A little background on Arts for Learning. Before we jump into the fellowship, we build relationships between artists and school community partners. We have a roster statewide of about 50 artists and ensembles. We are celebrating our 60th anniversary this year. Happy birthday, Arts for Learning. Originally just classical music, but as we were adapting at that point to the growing and changing needs of the communities in which we were embedded, we started adding visual art and dance and theater and storytelling and spoken word, and are now pretty open to any forms of expression, any co-creation that hi Giselle, that our young folks are wanting to use as their methods. We are part of a national affiliate network, about 30 affiliates across the country as well. That's a lot from me. I'm going to hand it over to our fellows, who you've all come to hear from. What has this fellowship, just very broadly, meant to you, Portia? And what have you been working on? Describe it.
This Artist Building Community Fellowship has meant growth. It has allowed me to center myself, even though right in the middle of the pandemic, which has been a small obstacle in completion of some of the goals that I set out for my fellowship. But one of the things is that we're building partners, and we are further energizing businesses and organizations, and understanding that Indianapolis has a plethora of artists with all art genres that can come in and help reach or help obtain understandings of communication and building within their communities as well as within their organizations. And so artists during the fellowship has an opportunity to have someone like themselves speak for them and to reach out and say, hey, if you're going to do this training, do you know that our roster has someone that can help ease some of that burden or enhance the program or workshop that you are already planning. And that is something that I've really enjoyed doing, whether or not we could call it program building and development, but it is definitely strengthening, enhancing the community, connecting the non-arts community to the arts community.
I would have to agree with Portia on that. Very well said, Portia, because as she mentioned, yeah, the pandemic has to some degree tempted to stifle what we're trying to do, but we've seen a lot of growth despite that. A lot of community collaborative engagement. Just as the name says, artist building community, and that's what it is. We become a family of artists and resource givers who understand that it takes a village technically to raise a community, and it's been a wonderful journey for me personally, because it's reinforced the need for deep growth as opposed to just wide growth. And we may talk about that a little bit later, but it's been an amazing journey because I've been able to partner not just with my other three fellows, but also with various groups within the community that I didn't even know, subgroups and other resource givers who are hungry, especially in the climate that our city is facing itself in now with the crime and the violence. People are looking for some type of catharsis, and just as the video said, a way to express themselves. So it's been a wonderful, wonderful journey, and I'm excited to be able to share what we do with you today.
Bridging, there's been a lot of bridging, and that has been going to be sustaining us.
Yes.
For the future, and the links that we've helped bridge together of people who didn't know each other, as well as people did not know that we have a beautiful harpist in the Arts for Learning community, and she can lift and build programs to meet anyone's needs. And so that's what I mean about that bridging, and some people might call it collaborating, but linking together and building is very important part of the fellowship, and that has new relationships have come out of that, and that's exciting to me.
Bridging is really resonating with me right now, as it is infrastructure. It's not just a connection, it's not just a collaboration, it's something that it takes a while to build. It takes planning, it takes listening and understanding both sides of whatever, right? Because if you have a bridge,
exactly,
and one side is all sand, or maybe that is a good, I don't build physical bridges, but let's say it's really just mucky. That's not going to work. How could we? Yeah, you got to understand both sides and build infrastructure, and it takes time and planning.
It takes time.
Bridging, yes. I love that. Wonderful. We did go about this as an iterative process. We didn't know what we didn't know, and we acknowledged that. We said, let's work with these wonderful artists embedded in these neighborhoods, embedded in these communities, artists we have relationships with at this point. How can we empower wonderful folks like Portia and Mark who are doing this work to better get to know them, the communities in which they're serving? As we are all feeling a little more disconnected than we were 2 years ago, as we have continually gone in and out of feeling various amounts of connectivity. The world is changing at an increasingly changing rate, and it takes this collective intelligence. And one piece that has anchored our collective intelligence, that has been a foundation of our fellowship, has been this wonderful text, Emergent Strategy by Adrienne Murray Brown. This has been a cornerstone of our fellowship. We've read this, meditated on it, talked about it at our regular meetings. We have met as a group since December, twice monthly. It's been wonderful. We don't always meet at the most convenient times because we all have out their schedules, but after every single meeting, we all walk away feeling more energized. And I'm always skeptical at that, but it always works. What is emergent strategy? And for folks that haven't read it yet.
I think it's a strategy based on transformation, bridging, as Portia said, and emerging, changing, developing. But it goes to a point that I mentioned earlier about the importance of building deep as opposed to just building wide, as building quantitatively as opposed to, qualitatively as opposed to quantitatively, being able to be in a place where sustainable relationships are made and fostered. And the only way that that can happen is when we dig deep. And, there was an old saying that you can't build a second story on a vacant lot. You have to actually first build the foundation before you even build the first floor, let alone the second floor. So with the emergent strategy that I've learned from the principles, it's just reinforced the power of collaboration through trust and making sure that what we do is done on solid ground, so the sustainability of it is sure. I didn't even know, how you don't, like Scott said, you don't know what you don't know. Sometimes you don't know what you do know, meaning you know certain principles in operation, but you don't know the theory behind it. So the Emergent Strategy book really, and the teaching and the conversations that we had as fellows really helped me understand the dynamic that it takes time to build. And the whole point of this is sustainability.
I like to add that when you say go deep, if I explain this as the heart of emergent strategy is that we have to have intentional adaptation. And so we have to have a sense of vulnerability.
Yes.
We have to be willing to learn. More importantly, we need to know that you have to know what your leadership styles are. When you are reaching out to encourage people to understand in conversations to grow, that you're not overbearing. So it's almost like, ego-less, but very patient, selflessness. And you've got to have a sense of being able to take the time. And so the potential of connectivity comes when you really look about and understand what one may mean when they say intentional adaptation. And so we have been reading excerpts from the Emergent Strategy book, which has been a very good platform for us to focus on. And I like to say that when we are faithful to our gifts that we have, that we are willing to share and lend to hold pieces of the community together, or to help them grow as we're bridging things and artists to organizations. And it's just a way in which we can know and be confident as well as effective in this journey that we're on as artist building community fellows.
And as we're looking to continue building, as we've been building here, through this microscope lens for the past 10 months, we've been building relationships, each of us, our whole lives, right? What are some of these tenets that make it sustainable? What makes a relationship sustainable?
Portia touched on it just then. One of the biggest ones for me was or is being vulnerable. Vulnerability, because when we set out as fellows, artists, building communities fellows, we started out with a town hall where we wanted, it was virtual, but we wanted to do more listening than speaking. Because instead of coming into a community saying, hey, we noticed that this is going on and this going on, so we're here to save the day and supply what you need. Well, to be vulnerable in this journey, one of the tenets of the Emergent strategy is to be vulnerable, to listen and to hear, to listen with the intent to hear and understand, not just with the intent to respond. And so it's been really a powerful journey for me, because things that I thought I knew going in that were going to be a solution, it may not have been the love language of that community. It could have been something that I interpreted as what I looked on and said, oh, well, this would be good to do. But once you get in the community and start to listen beyond your own mind, beyond your own expectations or even intentions, you can begin to see where people's hearts really are and what they really desire. And that's the joy for me. I've found joy in discovery. And I think that's one of the tenets for me, is that discovery and also the vulnerability.
So that commonality is that artists are appreciated when they have an opportunity to build with other artists. As they work together, you get to know them better. You're getting more gigs to build new programs while you're building new relationships. And so, of course, people are moving at different speeds, but the value of the learning process and the intentional building with community members, well, that's essential. And so what we're moving at is the speed of trust.
Yes.
The speed of trust. And therefore we're careful and deliberate when you're revisiting a tenant who thinks only in terms of things that they have done in the past, but we're doing, things are being handled differently. So we just have to be mindful of the relationships and, like Mark said, the love language, so that people don't feel overwhelmed.
Yes.
So that's why that speed of faith has to play an important role. And it has, to me, changed the paradigm. And I'm hoping that the 4 cohorts and I, as well as the staff of Arts for Learning, that we're building a force in our the state, not just our immediate Indianapolis community, to know just what we have on the roster and how we can help move programs and along in new directions, especially with the climate of social and emotional learning, sustainability, the fact that we've got to really enhance our emotional CPR, because we're dealing with 2 very movements right now, whether, the distance learning, the pandemic, the All Lives Matter, I call it the All Lives Matter movement, and us being, respectful of our cultures. This is really growth. It's been real growth for me, and I'm excited. And I'm sorry, I don't mean to be long-winded.
Oh no, Portia, you're
I'm a storyteller.
Yeah.
It's all good.
Yeah. I want to say too, real briefly, that Portia says she's a storyteller. I'm a teacher, so I brought an exemplar. It's on my desk. I didn't realize, but I'm a big Marvel fan, and when I look at Marvel or DC or any of the comic universes, I realize that every group has their own legion of superheroes, and I look at the artist roster as a league of superheroes
Yes.
where and it's funny because when you're watching a movie, a superhero movie, you're looking and you're realizing all of these different heroes have these amazing skills, and then here comes a moment in the movie where there's a certain skill that's needed, and here comes some other superhero out of nowhere, and you were like, oh, I forgot about them. They have the perfect skill, they have the perfect
Yes.
superpower for this situation. And that I believe that's what the roster is. It's a league of superheroes who artistically and intentionally empower the community through collaboration artistically and creatively. So yeah, that's part of that emergent strategy too, is just to be able to have that collaborative superhero mindset that we're not here to save the day, but we're here to help enhance the day.
And one superhero cannot possibly do all that, right? One superhero
Exactly.
can't be omnipresent, though there are superheroes that are omnipresent, but not let's yes. But how do we know what is the right hero for what situation? How can we possibly? When there's so many choices and so many communities and so many situations.
That's being intentional with the work. That's how we don't know, but we get it figured out because of that.
Yeah, I agree. It's about listening and knowing those. There's a old saying we used to say back in the church: "Know those who labor among you." And when you know who you're partnered with, or who's around you that can do whatever, it's beautiful when you can solicit the help or the gift of another teaching artist who,
Yes.
I may go into a school and realize, well, what I do is great, but I think this would be better suited for this person or this artist or this group. And I think that's what that artist building community does, because we build as we go and as we grow and as we know. So I'm excited that this for the 10 months that we've been doing this, that I've learned more about what I didn't know, and the discovery and being able to have collaborations with people like Mama Portia and Scott and Ploy and others who are part of it, are part of Arts for Learning and the fellowship. And it's made me a better artist. It's made me a stronger artist as well.
So when I was talking about, that speed of faith, holding on into the heart that every member of the community holds an effective piece to the solution. And so, for an example, Big Brothers and Big Sisters of Indianapolis, and until the conversation has had with a positive leadership style to be able to bridge the roster of Arts for Learning to their programming, to enhance their programming and whatever that is that they see in the future for workshops for their big and littles. And in those conversations, when we, that ego out of the way, and allow the new partner to share what it is that they would like to have exemplified from their organization, that's when you can fit and bridge things together. And it's all about that connectivity.
I've heard you both speak to this a bit. I'd like to highlight a principle that I'm realizing. You both have spoken to the need to sort of overcome the ego for the collective good. You've been building community amongst the roster, which was an unexpected twist of phrase of the fellowship. You know, the artists amongst themselves are building, not just in the neighborhood, but building a strong network among staff here, among artists, which is working to really shift this culture of how we see ourselves as staff, how we see artists, and what that looks like, which has been a wonderful and transformative experience for me as you know, an admin on this. But do you guys have any tips for that? As art is essentially an ego-centered activity, right? It's about self-expression. So how do you get it? How do you do that? How do you get away from that ego to express yourself while facilitating expression of the collective?
For me, it's because, first of all, building partners for the community can't just be done with me as a solo artist. And so to be able to forge new relationships with the artists on the roster for Arts for Learning, so that to get to know them, what else do they do? So for an example, there's a Melissa and I came together through this fellowship, and we've built a program called Lift Every Voice and Sing, based on understanding the history, where I, the storyteller and budding historian, have researched, but her understanding the composers of the time and who developed the song and the artist who produced this beautiful sculpture that premiered at the State Fair, getting to know what else she can do as far as not just being an instrumentalist, but a research and artist as well. Then we can build, which means that when I'm going to other organizations, then I am sharing more, not just about myself, but about what another artist on our roster can contribute. And so that, to me, is broadening the spectrum of what's available to a person or a group you're building a partnership with. And it is for us to know of all the different genres of arts and abilities and skills, to be able to share more with an organization, to build this partnership so that we can be working together for years to come.
I agree, Portia, I do. And I believe that as a musician, as a piano player, as a pianist, keyboard player, when I'm in my studio or I'm playing, the tender moments, the most vulnerable moments are the moments where my chord or my music reaches a point where I don't know where to go next. I don't know what chord to hit because I'm in the creative mode. And I think when I take that same spirit of humility or vulnerability by going to another artist and saying, hey, I need you, or going to the community and saying, I need you, that keeps me from having, as Scott mentioned, that ego, because, you know, as artists, you know, we love what we do. We are serious about what we do, passionate about what we do, but it is a fine line to make sure that you bring that passion, but also bring that humility as well, because what will happen is people will see that it translates in our artistry, it translates in our fellowship. All four of us were just coming to the table saying, like Scott said, well, I don't know what I don't know, but I'm open to learn. And I believe that's what makes it more sustainable. And we're in a community now in a time where people need to learn something new and understand that there are options beyond what they're seeing and what they're doing. And I think that's the first step.
Uplifting, truly incorporating all art forms from the roster to uplift.
Yes.
Well, gigs are needed.
I want to touch on a couple of these emergent strategy principles before we get to fielding some questions from folks. This idea about the fractal structure that comes from emergent strategy, right? The idea, for those that don't know, a fractal is something very small, intricate, that is theoretically at that same pattern, replicatable an infinite number of times at an increasing ratio, essentially. The idea that we do something small, sustainable, and replicatable, that, as Portia said earlier, could eventually be statewide, could eventually be national, global. Emergent strategy proposes that again, the best way to do big things is to focus on a sustainable process, a small change at once. Could you guys describe how you've been using that principle in your fellowships? What small changes are you making that are sustainable and infectious?
For me, I think it would be communication. Just to be able to initiate the conversation. Some people would think, oh, well, that's a small piece. To my point, it's a fractal. And once the communication begins and is, to Portia's point, once the communication flows at the speed of trust and at the speed of faith, the fractalization, as we called it in one of our meetings, it begins to take its own shape and form and growth. And for me, it started with communication, because to Scott's point, I was one of those that felt like, okay, well, I can go out, I can do it. I know what needs to be done. I'll go ahead and do it myself. As a musician, I don't know how many of you all are musicians out there, but I remember one time I had a friend of mine tell me, he said, Mark, you're known, this was years ago. He said, Mark, you're known as the musician that played with three hands, the keyboard player with three hands. And I said, why you say that? He said, because you play all the parts. And when he said that, I took that as a compliment. I was like, oh yeah, that's right. I can play the string line, I can play the bass, I can play the oboe, I can do all of that, because I play through 2 or 3, 4 keyboards at one time. And he looked at me, he said, huh?
You can play the oboe too?
Yeah, all of that, and you know, doing Stevie Wonder style. And the guy looked at me, he said, I don't mean that as a compliment. He said, I don't mean that as a compliment. He said, because you're playing everything, which doesn't leave room for anyone. So I'm learning through the fractal mindset that as we build small, begin to communicate, replicate what we can of ourselves, so we're not trying to do everything ourselves.
I think we just talked about that at your last.
Yep.
The last one-on-one conversation on Monday.
Yep.
About, yes, how can we take your method, your learnings, and because you can't be everywhere until we invent cloning.
Yep.
Then I guess we don't. That's the fractal, a Mark Pay and clone.
So fractal to is I'm a gardener, so I think in terms of sowing seeds of sustainable relationships. That is what I've gotten, and that's what part of the core of what I'm doing with the fractal mindset or concept, and that's growing sustainable relationships. And that connects the faith, and it connects the trust. And though the only chaotic, when we think about ongoing or continuing with the definition of fractal images, where it can be a little chaotic. But if you understand the direction and you continue moving, whether it's getting the first conversation and then setting the meeting, and then maybe there's a Zoom, and then there's a team building, and then there's the development of the program, and then there's the research into what art form can be highlighted to make this the best it can be. And so starting off with possibly small relationships, the big grow into larger movements, which would mean that things could last longer. When I say sustainable, and then creating things to keep going for the future, and just making sure that that time management in creating and bridging new relationships, that process of time, keeping in mind that you're utilizing your gifts and talents, but you also want to highlight and give opportunity to others who you are, that you're trying to help build this new community with. And those are the people on the roster for Arts for Learning. I think that when we replicate some systems, but we create some new systems, the growth that comes out of this is kind of said what I said earlier, and that's about that bridging. And when it's all said and done, I get back to the same thing, and that is creating sustainable relationships, building trust, and increasing faith.
Scott, if I can add one more thing quickly. Someone, I think it was Deanna or Dina, in the chat said, I'll focus on building relationships through servant leadership. And a lot of times, a lot of people think that's an oxymoron, that those are two separate things. But I think servant leadership is very important, because we tend to think of leaders as the ones that are telling everybody what to do. But technically, a greatest leader is the one that serves. And so to serve the community through this fellowship, through the bridging that Mama Portia's talking about, helps keep us, that's part of the thing, Scott, that keeps us focused on humility and vulnerability and less ego driven. So I want to thank Dina or Deanna, forgive me if I'm not pronouncing it correctly, but that servant leadership, I think, is part of one of the tenets of Emergent strategy, especially when you talk about being an artist building community.
Absolutely. And
I like where she says that the making those valuable connections.
Perfect segue. I'd love to talk about some other questions in the chat. We've got about 15 minutes left in the session. There's a 5-minute video from another one of our fellows who couldn't be here, Manon Voice, but I'd love to spend the next 10 minutes fielding questions from folks. We've got more questions. We can keep talking about this stuff, clearly. We've been meeting very regularly talking about all this. Other questions, comments from the audience, from the other folks in the room that they would like us to talk about. I will jump to more questions that we have prepared if needed. Okay, great. Perfect. Murmuration. Thank you, Caitlin. Murmuration is how bugs swarm. It's how animals move collectively as a together being. Birds do it in the air. They move sort of based on each other's wing patterns. how have we incorporated that into our work?
I
Go ahead, Portia.
incorporate
Collective
murmuration as a healthy spirituality. So in other words, when he brought up how when these Canadian geese all get up and fly in one direction, and somebody is dependent on somebody, or are they all working together to make a decision to go right? And then if you watch their flight pattern, in 1 second they change the direction. And then when they come down there, they come all down together and they commune together. And then one gets up and takes off, and then they all go together. Well, that when I say that it's a healthy spirituality, is because they're all trusting. They're leaning and depending on each other to get wherever they're going, to feed wherever they're going to feed, to bathe where they're going to bathe. And you can't tell that there's one leader, but they're collectively all working together. And understanding, having that faith and trust is why I say it's a healthy spirituality.
I agree with Portia. And it's interesting because I don't know, I've never interviewed the birds to find out how they do that. I'm amazed that it's not only birds, but I think there are other animals, and we as humans, there's a way that we can move collectively. I think it's like when you're in a band and the band is just grooving and everybody's feeling the music and there's nobody really directing, everybody just kind of knows where to go. Everybody just feels a breakdown in the music or something like that. I think for us that memorization principle in the community means everybody just being, everybody just flowing, and there's no big I's and little U's, and we're all just creatively just being together. And that's a risk that you take, that but the beautiful thing, when you see the beautiful pattern, it's nothing more pretty than seeing the birds just go the way they go collectively. It's beautiful.
Key Swahili term within the 7 principles of the Nguzo Saba is unity. So umoja, they're all working together. They're unified. They're all with like minds and like values. And even if there's some those that are not all necessarily lined up in order, when that trust memorization continues, then they're all unified. But the question from the clarinet guy was, what steps have we taken to build trust in communities that we are new to or visiting? I like what I do is I observe.
Yes.
I get, if I don't know or I'm not comfortable, I observe. I make a positive first impression. But my passion for what I'm doing really sells it. I don't he didn't want to say the word sell, but it definitely enhances one company or one organization, not-for-profit or for-profit, when they see that my passion about what I'm doing with this fellowship really does set the tone to help in the steps of building a community partnership. And I hope I answered your question, Eric.
Portia, I want to chime in on that quickly. Yes, you're exactly right. That passion And for me too, it's also what I call, I'm a foodie, so I'm gonna put food in it, but I call it the Chick-Fil-A syndrome. When you go into a community, say, how can I serve you? What can I do? And when you do something, it's my pleasure. That's rare, especially when you come into a new community and people think you're trying to take over, or they don't know if you're trying to take over, but you're there to serve. It goes back to that servant leader dynamic, and to be able to say, what do you need? How can I help? You go to Target and you wind up buying more stuff than you planned on, is because the customer service is like, makes you feel less guarded, and and then we wind up spending more. So yeah, I think the passion, as Portia said, and also that the heart of